This is Michelle Wiegers, and I'm excited to share this Q&A session recording with you. This event was held on February 9th, 2024, where I was the Mindbody guest speaker for This Might Hurt film screening sponsored by two homeopaths. These two women were so convinced of the power of mind-body healing that they wanted to sponsor a free film screening for their communities. I hope as you listen to my answers during this Q&A session, you'll find encouragement and new understanding to support your journey to unlearning chronic pain and other chronic symptoms.
Okay, so both we are homeopaths, and we really feel very strongly about sharing this with you, as you will soon find out. I was sent a random email from a woman. I mean, as a homeopath, I get, solicitations, and Ariel was her name, and she spreads the word about this film and offered me a free license to check it out. And I almost deleted it, but I didn't. And even though I was busy, I kept it in my inbox for a few weeks, and then I finally found some time to just take a quick look. Well, I got so attached to it, I watched the whole thing, and it validates what I have been telling my clients for years. And that is that the body speaks the mind. I was also moved by the stories you're about to see, and what resonated the most with me was the origins of this approach. Because in the late 1970s, my mom was in a car accident and was in bed with back pain for 3 years. She had to stop the work she loved, teaching young children, and was on really serious painkillers. And it was because of a Dr. John Sarnow and his book, the Back Pain Book, that my mother finally got herself out of pain. I've shared this book with some of my clients and wondered whatever happened to his work. Then, when I saw this film, I now know that Dr. Schubiner, who you will see tonight, has carried his torch and kept it alive. Cheryl.
All right. So again, thank you and welcome to this evening. Thank you to Abby. She is the real spark for this evening. The trailer sat in my inbox too for a few days. She asked me if I watched it yet. Then we watched the film, and oh my goodness, this needed to be shared. We knew before finishing the film that this brilliant work had to be shared. Again, it's not a film about homeopathy, yet this film highlights what Abby and I see daily in our homeopathy practices, the mind and body connections, the physical manifestations of some type of trauma, accident, and or loss in a person's history. If you've ever seen the television show Hoarders, there's always a therapist on site because often there's some type of trauma, accident, and or loss a person has suffered and they became stuck. So this film is a great way to show how to become unstuck. It's a journey, not an overnight solution. Like the homeopathic remedy arnica can speed the healing of a bruise, this mind-body process of healing in the film can also be helped alongside with homeopathy. Often I explain to my clients, our cells in our bodies register all things our lives take on when they've occurred, when they've happened. You know, if you will, picture a golf ball with all the divots representing these life imprints, traumas, accidents, losses, even medications and poisonings, even after these substances are no longer in the bloodstream. Homeopathic remedy will smooth out these divots, removing the roots in the cells, bringing us back to homeostasis. A reminder that someone would need to work with professionals through this process, and that can be us and or with Michelle or others who've been trained in this process, and we'll have the honor of speaking with Michelle in the Q&A after the film.
I would like to introduce Michelle and know that Cheryl will be moderating this Q&A, and I'll come back in towards the end. We'll go for a full hour if, by 9:30 or before. If we don't have enough questions, we'll finish before. But thank you all for coming back and for your questions ahead of time. So I'd like to introduce Michelle. I am so excited that Michelle was able to join us tonight. She's a treasure resource for us. She's a certified professional life coach, a mind-body coach, writer, and poet who found her creative voice and mind-body coaching work after recovering herself from over 25 years of chronic pain, fibromyalgia, sciatica, chronic fatigue syndrome, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, and symptoms associated with Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. Through Dr. Howard Schubiner's work and teachings and other vital mind-body resources, she recovered from these mind-body symptoms, going from barely being able to walk to leading an active life. She's committed to creating restorative healing experiences through her individual work with clients. She coaches and teaches using mind-body science and life coaching tools to help clients and students discover the truth inside their symptoms and stories so they can recover and take their lives back. She created and now offers a self-guided online course called How We Heal on her website. And coming soon, Michelle will be launching her new podcast. I can't wait to listen to that, called Creating Space, which will focus on helping you make room for your authentic and creative self while learning to let go of self-pressure, anxiety, and mind-body symptoms. We're very grateful to have you with us tonight, Michelle. Welcome. You can unmute.
Thank you so much, Abby, Cheryl, and everyone here. It's such a privilege to be here. I just rewatched the film with you, and just so I would come fresh again. But I hope all of you have enjoyed it, and I look forward to sharing tonight, answering questions, and sharing maybe even a little bit of my own story. Would you like me to go ahead and start with that, Abby?
Sure. So yeah, let's get started with some questions that we have in the Q&A. Again, if you could put your questions there, that would be great. So the first one here is, where does Dr. Schubiner work?
So he's in Detroit, Michigan. And there will be a resource list that Abby had mentioned that we're going to share. And there's a website on that resource list called the PPDA. It's a Psychophysiologic Disorder Association, and there's a whole group that works now with Dr. Schubiner. He's not the only one in the mind-body world now working on recovering symptoms and that sort of thing. So he does a variety of trainings, and for practitioners, his vision is to really bring it to the mainstream medicine. So that's where he is. And there is now a yearly conference for the Psychophysiologic Disorder Association where people gather. And so there's a lot of resources out there. I'm not sure how many people are aware. The film was, I think it launched in 2019. So it was recorded before then, probably, 2017, 2016. I'm not exactly sure. So we've come a long way even in science since then, just as a side note.
Wonderful. So another question we have, are there any homeopaths working with these doctors, or do you know if Dr. Schubiner has been in touch with any homeopaths?
I don't know that. No. I know there's definitely an approach to trying to keep things as streamlined and simple as possible as far as like looking directly at brain science because of the widespread skepticism around this approach. And so I'm sure there's a lot of different supports that could come along the way. But I know that, at this point, I'm not aware of that. I'm not sure if you all are, Abby or Cheryl.
So what I can share first that I did email Dr. Schubiner after I saw the documentary and just asked him if he knew much about homeopathy because I felt like it would be such a great adjunct. And he just said, he thanked me for my kind words about the documentary, but he said he really didn't know much about homeopathy. I emailed him back and said, well, if ever you're interested, let me know. I'm happy to tell you. So I haven't heard from him yet, but who knows, maybe we will. So Cheryl, I just thought maybe we might want to hear from Michelle to hear her backstory a little bit. That might be nice for everyone to hear.
Sure.
Michelle, would you mind sharing a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I saw a question. Someone was asking how I found a path to healing. So
Oh, good. Okay.
it's definitely part of it. So I'll take a few minutes if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
So my story is a complex one. If you want to know even more, then you probably, I don't have any trouble sharing because I think that's part of what can open up healing for people. So when you access my website, you can hear even more than I should be able to share just in these few minutes right here. But I want to say that, this approach, clearly in the film, there was leg pain, gut, issues in the one woman, Kim, wrist and hand pain, back pain. But for me, my pain started so young, and I went through over 25 years of chronic symptoms and chronic pain and chronic conditions. And so when I was at my worst, which was in 2016, I was homebound. I was actually measured for a wheelchair because I had been so separate from the world because I couldn't walk very well. I couldn't do much out of the house anymore. And so it was actually right before I found about the mind body work that I was ready to just accept that I was disabled and to build a life as best I could instead of constantly hunting for what might cure me. And so to unwind that a bit, I started with back pain, foot pain in high school. When I was in college, I started having IBS issues. Irritable bowel syndrome was diagnosed during my college years. Post-college, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, with chronic fatigue syndrome. And my list goes on. Over the years, I really learned to kind of learn to the best I could to manage life with these chronic conditions and chronic symptoms. And the fatigue, the pain just grew worse. I went to a host of practitioners, physical therapists, medical practitioners, chiropractic, acupuncture, naturopath, Western medicine practitioners, Eastern. I kind of just did the gamut, diets, supplements, tons of testing, thousands of dollars, always desperately searching for the cause, for a cure, for hope, to get out of those symptoms. And so at one point I did contract some kind of virus that got me really sick, and I was in the hospital for about 10 days. And that spiraled me into a lot of extreme symptoms like extreme weakness, and shortness of breath. It severely worsened my chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms, and dizziness and lightheadedness began. And what I now know, I didn't know then, but what I got diagnosed years later was that I had POTS symptoms. I think there might have been a question about POTS in the Q. I can definitely speak to that. So it took me almost 8 months to feel like the dizziness was starting to lighten, but then it worsened in years later. So the POTS symptoms went up and down. In 2016, I was diagnosed with Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. I still have it. It's a hypermobility genetic disorder. I have 4 kids. All 4 of my kids are hypermobile. We're all awkward as all get out. But when I was diagnosed with Ehlers Danlos, my husband and I were like, we finally figured out the root cause of what all this was. We knew there was something. We always felt like, I felt like there was something under all of this, and I hadn't found it yet. And so when I was diagnosed with Ehlers Danlos, I was like, oh my gosh, finally we have found the root cause. But then I started looking at the trajectory of that diagnosis. Many people are in wheelchairs. Many people are permanently disabled. When I got that, I was diagnosed in August, and I walked into the hospital. This was at Dartmouth Hitchcock in New Hampshire. I live in the southern Vermont. So that's a really wonderful hospital close to me, relatively speaking. And so anyway, within a month, my pain had gotten so severe that I had to start to use a cane to walk. I couldn't get up and down the stairs without a cane. My foot pain, my feet started swelling. It was all these new symptoms that were more POTS related symptoms. And again, that's kind of when the housebound phase began. Going around stores wasn't an option. I would kind of like go to one friend's house, go to church on a Sunday sometimes, and mostly be at home. And that's when in early 2017, a friend reached out to me. And this is a friend who we lived in when we used to live in the South. And so I lived near her before we moved north. And she reached out to say that she was better. And she had had all the same diagnosis I had: chronic fatigue, chronic back pain, sciatica, IBS, fibromyalgia. I think she had had the wrist pain that I had had for a while. POTS, EDS, I mean, all the things. And so she was saying she was better. And she said she was so much better that she was going to the store to get hiking boots because she was hiking for the first time in her adult life. I'm like, how is this possible? I didn't understand, but she sent me a book called Unlearn Your Pain, the link to the book. That's Dr. Schubiner's book that he wrote about recovering from chronic pain, how to reverse the symptoms what the film highlighted. That approach is in his book, Unlearn Your Pain. And then she sent me some key, like, short videos and links and lectures that a lot of those links are actually still on my website today. And I watched those and I read the book and I dove in and told my husband about it. And he's like, I'm excited for you to look into it, but I'm sorry, I can't hope. I can't hope with you because we have gone through, oh, this is going to work. Oh, this might work. Oh, now this treatment is going to work. Now this is the thing that's going to work. I mean, we went through so many things. And he's like, I'm fine if you do it, but I just can't go there with you. I just accepted that your disability. And so, he couldn't get there. And I got that. So anyway, to fast forward, I really learned to say no to the symptoms, to work on unlearning those triggers, different things that I did or movements that I made that would increase pain or other symptoms. I began emotional processing work. And really the symptoms faded rather quickly. That sometimes happens for some people. But then there's a kind of an up and down. Healing is never a straight line with this approach, as you see, like the young man in the film who, was so much better. And then he went back and got so much worse and fear took over again. And so it is an up down process for a lot of people. But 2 years into the work, I was completely recovered. I was really recovered much, much earlier than that. I would say like in a handful of months. But then I had all these emotions to deal with because what was under the surface for me was now surfacing. And so I went through a lot of work that way to heal emotionally alongside. And so anyway, this is a little bit long, so I'm going to cut it short here because I want to leave some time for questions. But just at that point, I will end and say, when I first healed, I was like, I have got to find a way to share this with others. This is so life-changing. I thought I was going to be disabled the rest of my life. And now I can like go play with my kids and swim in the ocean and go on walks and exercise and like all these things. And so I decided, I thought maybe I would become a therapist, and I looked into it and I thought about getting my MSW, and I really felt like the therapy dynamic was not exactly what I was looking for, because I started looking into coaching, because coaching is such a change and transformation oriented dynamic. And you can make a lot of progress in just a few sessions with this approach in coaching, and therapy is not usually that, laid out that way. So anyway, I can say more about that later, but that's when I began to train. And in 2019, I began my coaching practice, and I've been working in this ever since, and it is such an honor. Yeah. So that's
Amazing.
a really brief, I'm sorry, it's not as brief as it could have been, but
Oh,
No,
you're great.
overview.
it's great to know that people, when they reach out, they're reaching out to people that have already gone through the process themselves, so they have a total understanding, which is so helpful. So we have another question. Have you seen any successes with Lyme disease? And if so, any success story available?
Sure, that's a good question. So when we talk about mind-body symptoms, we need to look at it in the chronic phase. So chronic conditions are defined as being longer than 3 months, 3 to 6 months. So if you're in the acute phase of Lyme disease where you have an active tick infection, that needs antibiotics or whatever treatment to address that acute infection. It's when symptoms become chronic and long-term. So if you're speaking about chronic Lyme, yes, this approach often does help chronic Lyme. Now, where I will say there's a caveat, because some Lyme disease does cause damage to the heart. Like, some people have those PICC lines straight to their hearts and that kind of thing for antibiotics. So not that I'm a medical practitioner, by the way, caveat, I am not so I can't speak from a medical practitioner standpoint, but I can give you feedback that I've had. I don't know if I've worked one-on-one with clients, but I've had students in my course, How We Heal Chronic Pain and Fatigue, who had chronic Lyme and recovered with this work. If you go to the This Might Hurt film website, that website is Kent, the director, has done an incredible job at curating a lot of different resources for different kinds of symptoms. I can't remember off the top of my head if he has specific things around Lyme, but it is absolutely one of those things. If you look at what's happening neurologically, that the brain is perpetuating the symptoms. And that's really what's happening. I can explain that a little bit more in a second, but so that chronic phase of Lyme disease, it can often be the brain kind of just like perpetuating the symptoms rather than like the acute phase when, basically Dr. Schubiner says, like, and we recover from infections. Our bones, when they're broken, they heal. He says scars don't hurt, like bones, like our bodies like are made to recover. And so sometimes when we've got that chronic symptoms just being perpetuated, that's oftentimes that neural pathway link perpetuating the symptoms. And there's actually ways to interrupt that and then stop the symptoms, which is the power of this work.
That's beautiful. Another question, what specific training did you do?
So I think maybe Abby read, so I mentioned that I decided not to train as a therapist because I really wanted to spend the majority of my time helping people specifically with mind-body recovery. And therapy is going to help people, right? Like with all of the background emotions around it. And I do talk with clients about their emotions for sure and their life context, because a lot of this work that's a lot of how we start to understand why symptoms are there. But anyway, so I trained with Awaken Coach Institute and I'm a certified professional life coach. And I use a lot of my coach training tools with clients as they are starting to recognize where the symptoms started. And then we get into needing to do things like set boundaries, say no, find ways to live into our true selves and who we really are instead of constantly slipping into perfectionism or people pleasing. There's actually a whole list of common personality traits that many people with mind-body disorders have. And so I can talk more about that if we want to, but that they tend to be like good people who are, like, for example, in the film, Tony felt like he should have been there to protect his friend from driving, right? He should have been there for his ex to protect her. Like he had that like burdened personality to just say like, I could have done something, right? And so that's oftentimes a part of this as well. So I also trained with Dr. Schubiner and Hal Greenham. He's a psychotherapist in Australia. They have a practitioner training program. I took that in 2020 and it was phenomenal. There's a lot of tools I was already using, but then they introduced new ones and some of the tools I'd already been using. And that training just helped me, have a more framework for working with clients and really helped me shaping the course that I created. So.
Okay. Now, ankylosing spondylitis, I don't think was mentioned in the film, but is there any work with that?
There is, yes. So there is the film has Dr. Schubiner references a study in the film on let me see, I've got this. So there's a book called Hidden from View, A Clinician's Guide to Psychophysiologic Disorders. This is written by Howard Schubiner and Alan Abbas. Alan Abbas is a, I think he is a MD who is also a psychiatrist, I believe. But anyway, there's a section of this book that highlights that study done on different kinds of back pain. And what they did was they took, he referred to it in the film, they took MRI screenings of people who were asymptomatic, who had zero pain and zero sensations, and they found in the I don't know how to say this, spondylolisthesis. I can't.
Oh, ankylosing spondylitis. Yep.
Spondylitis. Thank you. The chart on that in this book, it says that in 50% of 80-year-olds they find it, in 14% of 50-year-olds they find it, and 3% of 20-year-olds. So what they're saying is there's disc degeneration, disc bulges, disc protrusions, fissures, degeneration, and spondylitis. I'm sorry, I'm not a medical practitioner. I can never say that word. But anyway, they found all of these things in people who are walking around with zero back pain, zero.
Right.
And so what they're saying is, just like our hair grays as we get older, our skin wrinkles as we get older, they're saying our spine degenerates when we get old, as we age, but it's not conclusively indicative of the cause of the pain. Hence the reason why they say back surgeries are very often not beneficial, because they're not, the back surgery is probably trying to address a mind-body process, which of course the surgery is not going to touch. I mean, there are, of course, like physical things that you need to get ruled out. And I might mention that in a minute, but so yes, that is actually, that condition can be addressed with this approach.
Okay. Another question, is emotional processing a specific model or just another way of referring to therapy?
That's a really excellent question. It is, there's a specific model. So in the film, you might have heard Howard Schubiner referring to ISTDP, intensive short-term psychodynamic therapy. That's the model that he was using and had his students using with each other. And I'm not sure that he still does that approach, to be honest. I think I'm almost with the one woman who is like, I think I want to process this with someone one-on-one. Like, this is too much for me. I love that she did that. She set her boundary and was like, I can't do this. This is too much. Just context of the film. But so the emotional processing, for example, I experienced trauma in my childhood. I went through years of therapy for it. And Schubiner refers to this. There's not one therapist who ever said, oh yeah, your chronic fatigue, your chronic brain fog, your chronic pain must be related to these difficult life experiences you went through. No one made that link. But what I needed was instructions on finding tools to, and this is what I do with clients and in my course as well, use tools like expressive writing. It's actually a really powerful tool to kind of help. What you're doing is when mind-body symptoms are held in the body, they're often there because of our repressed emotions or stress, or even the way we've treated ourselves, or even just the experience of symptoms on repeat. What I mean by that is, like, living with chronic symptoms itself is traumatizing. Like, if you're watching and you've been through any number of years of chronic pain or other chronic conditions, you know how hard it is. So even that experience of those is also part of the difficult things to recover from. So the emotional processing part, what becomes really important is to start to name what we're feeling, to identify those emotions and find ways to release them out of the body. That's a very simplistic answer. That there's a therapy modality called EAET, and it's called Emotional Awareness and Expression Therapy. And the emotional awareness part is like to be aware that, oh, wait a minute, what you're saying is this symptom, underneath the surface of this symptom is an emotion. And let me, if you don't mind, I'm just going to back up and explain what I mean by that. So when we have stressful experiences in our lives, either it can be like right now, like current life stress. It can be stress from the recent past or the distant past as children. You know, any along any of the continuum. It can actually be a previous injury, that we maybe like had an injury in college, and then like we're 50 and we're like, gosh, this is coming back up again. So that's there can be like this sensitization in our nervous system, in our brains, where like there's these learned neural pathway links from previous injuries or from that keep on that get reactivated and keep on going. And so what happens is stress, previous injuries, childhood sensitization, even the way we treat ourselves, it triggers our nervous system. It's a subconscious process. It's not something that we're like consciously aware is happening. But our brains get triggered and that fight, flight, or freeze response kicks in. And it's a real fear response in the brain. So let me just give you a real practical example. When we deeply love someone, we are also deeply enraged with, because no one loves perfectly, and we do get hurt by those who love us, right? It's much easier for us to be present to love than to anger. And we saw that kind of conflict, that inner conflict in the film, right? Some of the people going through the course. So what our brains do is say, oh, well, it's not, I'm a good person. I'm not going to feel anger towards that person. Or maybe anger is unsafe because someone's been rageful towards us and we know how afraid we were. So then we don't feel open enough to express anger. And anger is a big one that many people are repressing and then creating symptoms in the body. So I promise I'll stop blabbering on here in just a second. But what happens is, so the danger signal gets triggered in the brain. The fear response kicks in, and the brain is like convinced that this anger that we feel towards a loved one is as dangerous as the bear in the woods that we've run away from, right? Like that automatic process, that danger signal, that protective response in our brains kicks in. And so it's so the brain kind of shuts down the emotion. And like if we shut down emotion, I mean, that's like the life force in our lives. I mean, it's not just going to dissolve. And so what happens is we hold on to that emotion. We kind of clamp up, shut down, and it creates literal tension in the body. Tension myositis syndrome is another word. If you start to look into this work, in the film, you might have heard Dr. Schubiner refer to Dr. John Sarno, and there was a couple clips from Dr. Sarno in the film. He's the one who originally discovered this work, and then Schubiner actually went and studied with Sarno before he passed. He's now no longer living, but I bring Sarno up because I refer to some of his books are really fabulous for introducing this approach. But he coined this process, TMS, or tension myositis syndrome. So it's basically, if you think about it, I explain to clients like this all the time. If you get afraid, what do? We like tense up. We like pull in, clench our hands, hold our breath. We're like, so if you think about it, if we are subconsciously, that fear response is triggered, we are then holding in and shutting down. And so the invitation becomes to then process those emotions and start to let go and release those. And there's we can do that in a therapy context for sure. But if the therapist doesn't know this approach, they may not be able to guide us. I often actually work one-on-one with clients, and they'll continue working with their therapist, and then we'll work on things, and things will come up in coaching, and then they work on that with their therapist. Now, that was an extremely long answer, but it's hard to explain the why it's different. What we have to process without explaining that sort of like, the trigger. We get triggered, the pain, the symptoms come, and then I want to say there's what the other piece of, once we have symptoms themselves, we end up developing this fear, worry, focus around the symptoms, and that actually re-triggers the danger signal. And so that's why we get into this cycle where it's like we have pain, and then we have fear, and it's like the pain grows to the size of the fear, and it just gets bigger and bigger. And that's why when you heard my story, I mean, I started with IBS or chronic back pain and IBS, and it just like spiraled for decades into all of these crazy symptoms. And that's what happened for me. That's what happened for many people. I will say, you don't have to have like a huge laundry list like I did. You could have one symptom. Like I have a client who has tinnitus. That's all she has. She has ringing in her ears, and she's working with that. Now, years ago, she did have back pain. So she, like the woman with the wrist pain in the film, sometimes the pain moves around the body. And if it's doing that, that's hallmark of the sign of how mind body symptoms move around in us. So that was a big, huge, long response. Let me give it back to you, Cheryl.
Yep. No, that was interesting. Very interesting. Okay, next question. Is there any symptom or diagnosis that this would cause harm following this treatment?
No, well, okay. Let me back up a little bit. So, I'm looking at the chat. The question was, can this treatment cause harm? Is that correct?
Right. Can this treatment yeah,
Okay.
harm.
So, no, in the sense that there isn't any kind of like, you know, medication, surgery, like there's nothing medically changing in the body. If you've ever been to a therapist and you like clicked and it worked really, really well, and you got progress and you feel like you were like healing, that's an amazing dynamic. If you've ever been to a therapist and gotten triggered and that person wasn't hearing you and you were missing each other and you felt like even more frustrated leaving and maybe the anxiety or depression was increasing, I mean, that treatment isn't necessarily effective, right? So in the sense that, can this harm us? I think the only way that I've seen it do that is if when someone puts so much pressure on themselves to beat themselves up to heal really fast. And they try to do it all at once and they kind of dive in. It's almost like, let me just peel off the band-aids and the scabs of all the wounds all at once. And then you kind of get flooded emotionally. And so I would say the only drawback of doing this work could be doing it in a way that's not taking into account um, the best way that's it's going to do it in a safe way. So safe meaning safe emotionally. There's no physical danger involved, especially because I should mention this, I'm not sure I got a chance to yet, but the very first approach when you are working towards recovering from mind body symptoms is to get accurate diagnosis. And what I mean by that is to first rule out major structural problems, disease processes. Obviously, if you have a cancerous tumor pressing on your spine, like we're not doing mind body work. That would be dangerous. So you need to have all of those like fractures, infections, disease process, muscle disease, arthritis, all these things ruled out. And so that then we can rule in a mind body diagnosis. So it's not safe to just approach this kind of willy-nilly and try it with anything unless you've had practitioners and testing and medical testing rule it out. And so when you get to that place where the doctors say there's nothing wrong with you, or when your practitioners come back and say, well, this is what you have any of the things that I mentioned, chronic fatigue syndrome, CRPS, fibromyalgia. There's actually a list on the Psychophysiologic Disorders Association link, a list of common mind body disorders. It's a good place to look. So if you're wondering, what you have, could this be mind body? Check that list because it really is accurate. So you rule out major causes, then you rule in the mind body cause. And there's ways to do that. I teach that in my course. I work with clients in teaching that. There's different hallmarks, like the way we look at the way the body normally functions and how mind body symptoms are different. Let me give you an example. If you have like a wrist problem, it's not going to then move to your gut. Like that's not a functional, normal function of the body. If you have a wrist problem, it's going to stay in your wrist. But in the film, Maureen, she had the wrist pain and then it went into her gut. And her gut was getting like stirred up again. Her old IBS symptoms were coming back. So that's one of the things that we look at, like If it's moving around the body, that's not consistent with how, disease process works. So we look at when the function, the inconsistent, and the triggered aspects of mind-body symptoms to rule in. And then we go forward with learning pain reprocessing tools and emotional processing tools, and sometimes even making life changes if it's necessary, because that sometimes becomes necessary.
So there's a two-part from the same person from the prior question to this last one, where she said the answer was great. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if you see more women than men in your practice. It's a generalization, but men typically express anger more easily than women. And she also asked if she'd like to know more about the common personality traits with the mind-body illness. That they tend to share, which you kind of touched on a little bit, but.
Yeah, I can touch on that a little bit more. So I will say that there's a really common, and I don't know if this is generational, cultural, it's a mix of it all. But there's a lot of people that I know in my generation, I'm almost 50, to give you context, that grew up in houses that didn't talk about emotion. You don't really talk about your emotions. You feel something, you kind of just like scoot it under the rug. Pretend it's not there. Now that could be a generational thing. It can be, there can be all kinds of different reasons why we aren't skilled at being present to or accepting or processing emotions. That can be cultural. It can be all kinds of things. So is it, I don't know that I can say that that's like more often men or women, but I will say I tend to work almost exclusively with women because that's who reaches out to me. So I happen to have sexual trauma in my past. And so when I was recovering, I had no idea that my body was holding on to all. The Body Keeps the Score. If you're familiar with that book, it's been like a bestseller for a really long time. It talks about both the trauma that sexual abuse victims go through and the trauma that military vets go through. And so I hear you, what you're saying, like maybe your experience has been that men express anger a little bit more readily. It's also sometimes true that men have a harder time being present to emotions than women. Sometimes we express them, more. Now, I mean, it's neither here nor there. I will say it affects everyone, and it's a common, if you think about it, if you've ever had a headache because of a stressful day, if you've ever stood up to speak and give a presentation and you're suddenly soaked in your armpits or your hands are clammy, if you've ever gotten sick to your stomach because you were like dreading a conflicting conversation you had to have with a loved one, if you've ever blushed, if you've ever had red cheeks because you're embarrassed, all of those are mind-body processes. All of us experience this. The mind-body connection is to be human. So what happens is when we get stuck in chronic symptoms is when those emotions get shut down and unprocessed in the body, right? So all of us know what it's like to have our bodies respond to emotion. So that's not a new thing. So yeah, that's how I would answer that. I'm hesitant to say anything overarching about all women and all men because we're all so different, but I get your question a little bit. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yes.
One comment on the personality traits. So if you can think of anything that feels like self-pressure, so needing to control your environment, always needing to be pleasing everyone else, always needing to be liked, being the good person, being a perfectionist, having really high standards for yourself, sometimes honestly having low self-esteem, or being really hard on yourself, critical of yourself, things like that. Anything that those personality traits tend to create symptoms because if our nervous system, our inner self is feeling so pressurized by trying to just like push and strive and never rest. I always have to do, always have to go nonstop. We're really kind of mistreating ourselves by doing that. And I wish I could say I don't relate to these personality traits, but I think almost everyone with mind body symptoms do. And so those are some examples of the mind body or the personality traits. I actually did a free webinar on this a number of years ago. I think the link is still on my website. If you want to see more about the personality traits, you can go to my resources page, and I can put the link here if you want. But I know I think it'll be in the aftercare resources as well. But anyway, that can be found on the website there.
Okay. So one comment before the last few questions. This has given me the best understanding of this condition. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Question, let's see. What would you say about arthritis? Can I have this diagnosis without pain?
So arthritis is a good question. And I would have to go back in the real details of the course that I took to reread again. But from my memory right now, I actually asked this question of Dr. Schubiner when I was in his practitioner training, because I had clients who were dealing with arthritis. Some of them were getting better. And so he talked about how there's a macro and a micro level of arthritis. And I think when arthritis lives in like one particular joint, that could be like a physiological change in that particular joint. But when it's a generalized macro diagnosis of arthritis, that can be partially or even entirely mind body. Now, rheumatoid arthritis, I think, is a different story. So I can't really speak as an expert on that particular symptom, except to say there's a very high probability that there could be some arthritis. And this is what I say for everyone. By the way, I just want to say caveat. If you're watching this and you're like, whoa, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that this could really work for me. I can't believe that this could be like stress. That doubt is completely normal. So I hope that you hear that. And so what I say to people who feel like a little unsure about this approach, or they're like, well, I've got this physical condition, could this help? And when I say physical condition, I'm not referring to major things like heart disease or lung disease, or I'm not like that. But there are some studies that people will have arthritis findings and that they do recover. What I want to say anecdotally, not really scientifically, but to say, what if doing this work would take away 50% of the pain you experience, and the other 50% is arthritis? How would that be? I mean, and that's where I think if you have an opening to explore your life context, the emotions you experience, and we haven't really talked about today, but there's a new film out called Pain Brain, and it's on the list of resources. I think, did I put it on the list of resources, Abby? I think I did. I'll check on that in a second. But that was put out because there was a back study done recently, the Boulder back pain study, and it's focused on only a tool called PRT, pain reprocessing therapy. And that approach, it doesn't approach the whole emotions side of things. What pain reprocessing therapy does is your goal is to change the relationship to the symptom itself. So you see how, like, in the film, when the teenager, Tony, I believe, was saying his symptoms really were connected with fear. And that, I mean, he was naming the fear response. He was like, yeah, I'm afraid I can't keep doing this. And so the fear is there. And so the fear is almost taking over him and symptoms are back. So what we do, I do this with clients as well. So not every client needs to like dive into all their emotional trauma or emotional history or even current stress. Some people literally just need to understand what's happening in the mind-body connection. So like understanding the science is key, which is where when I teach my course, and it's now an online course, but I start there with pain science. But then you work with the pain reprocessing therapy tools, especially a tool called somatic tracking, where your goal is to change your relationship to the symptom itself. One, by like starting to understand that the symptoms you're experiencing can be unlearned and reversed. That's like a new thing usually for us, right? To find that out. And then to try to practice being present to the symptoms without fear. That's the tool, somatic tracking. Anyway, I'm not going to go on and on about PRT, but I just wanted you to know I would definitely be doing you a disservice tonight if I didn't at least bring up PRT and that film and that study and those resources and approaches, because many people, all they need to do is understand the brain science. They literally, some people read a book about it and they're better. I'm not kidding. Like, if they call it the book cure or the knowledge cure. You understand what's happening and suddenly you're like, oh, I'm actually safe. There's nothing wrong with me. And it makes the symptoms go away like almost magic. Sometimes those cycle back, and then everyone's different. But then the next phase, some people just need pain reprocessing therapy, which is really retraining your brain's relationship to your body and your relationship to the symptoms. And many people also need the emotional processing part as well. So when I start with like a new client, we cover all of that. And it's also why in my course, like, I didn't want to just do it all on emotions. I wanted to have all those pieces in place, because you don't really know you're going to read a lot and you're going to recover, or you're going to do a lot of breath work and somatic tracking and somatic meditations, and that can help you heal. And then there might be the emotional life context stuff. So not to confuse you and throw more at you, but I do want to assure you, if you're like, I really don't think this is emotional for me, it's possible that there's another path. As far as it's not different than the mind body. It's all housed in the mind body work. So yeah, that it's just important to know that I think if this film was being made today, I know they would be talking about pain reprocessing therapy. In fact, there's a huge introduction to PRT on the This Might Hurt film website that Kent Bassett, the film director, curated. So you can learn a lot more about it there too.
It is that film Pain Brain is on that resource list that will be.
Okay, good.
So that's good. So okay, yeah, I guess we got one more last question and then we can maybe wrap it up. Are most autoimmune diseases considered mind body, say Hashimoto's or RA? I mean, you did say maybe RA is different, but what about some of the other autoimmunes?
So I think, I don't know that I could say most autoimmune. No. I would point you, because I'm not a medical practitioner, I would point you to the PPDAs and their stance, because they have a extensive medical team that they actually put out an entire textbook on this for medical practitioners, and they're trying to bring that textbook to like medical schools. So I would really want to point you in that direction, to go to the PPDA website. And that's one that it'll be on the links, the follow-up links. I think I might have it here too. I could just copy this. They have a quiz on the PPDA's website, and I think that questionnaire will take you there, but you can look, if you click on that website, if you can see it in the chat, I'm not sure if you can, hopefully. You can see the common list. I don't think Hashimoto's is considered mind body off the top of my head. I think arthritis, I already talked about, like there's sometimes there can be aspects of it that are mind body and some that are not. So that's kind of where I would leave that. That said, can I just say one more thing? I have a connective tissue disorder. I have a medical condition that I thought was the root cause of my symptoms. If I don't exercise and strengthen, and I'm not like a super fit person, I'm just going to say, but if I don't exercise and do some strength work, like my joints will sublux, like my knee will pop out, and that's a hypermobility issue. So I still physically have that. But there was also, like, this is crazy, but I know that I had so much fear around my knee, especially subluxing, which is basically sort of like a half dislocation. I had to, when I was recovering my body, I had to work with the fear I had around that part of my body.
Mm.
So I had fear that was causing more symptoms in that part of my body, even though I have a physical, like my knees go backwards like Barbie legs. Like, I mean, they're,
Mm.
it's just the way it is.
Mm.
So is it possible that an autoimmune condition, that you develop fear around certain symptoms and that kind of thing? I think it's absolutely possible because of what I know about how that can snowball the fear pain fear response. So that's about all I could say around, yeah, around that.
Okay. So I want to say thank you so much, Michelle, for being here with us. Yes, we're both very grateful. Thank you, Cheryl, for monitoring the Q&A and managing that process. Did you have any final words, Michelle, that you wanted to share with folks?
Sure. Let me just mention, I didn't get to before, but I told you all about the PRT, pain reprocessing therapy.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to learn more about that, there's a book called The Way Out. And I just saw this week that the Kindle version of that book is by Alan Gordon, who's the head of the Pain Psychology Center in California. And he works extensively with Howard Schubiner, and he's in this mind body world, one of the mind body experts. Anyway, that book is on sale for $2.99 until I think it's tomorrow. I
Mm-hmm.
saw it on his Instagram this week, and I thought, oh, I got to tell the group this. So, The Way Out, you can find it by Alan Gordon. You can find it on Amazon. The Kindle version is $3 right now. I'm not sure how much it normally is. I have the paper copy. I don't have the Kindle, but anyway. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention because that's something to get. I did link to the Unlearn Your Pain book in the resource list. It's a phenomenal book, and that's really the center of what we saw in the film. I do want to say my How We Heal course, How We Heal Chronic Pain and Fatigue. If you go to my website, you want to learn more about that. I mean, I'm biased, but it's a phenomenal introduction to this work because I bring in all aspects of it, the pain reprocessing, the mind body science, and the emotional processing, and all of these tools. So I decided, because I was doing this event, that I would put a big sale on it because I thought, why not give more people access to it? So there's actually, you can get like $120 off of it right now. And I also do group coaching. So sometimes I'll do a group coaching experience where like there'll be a group of students that purchase the course, and then we meet for live sessions to kind of process what you're doing through the course. So it's a self-study course, and then we have there's a group coaching aspect as well. If you'd like to join something like that, where you kind of want to like, have support and not just go through something on your own. I do work one-on-one with clients. I tend to work with clients who've already have a pretty strong introduction to this work because sessions, you just get so much more out of a session if you've already read a couple books or done my course or watched this film and then dove into some more resources, because there's a lot of studying and learning you can do on your own and then bring that into coaching. I do have sometimes where I start with clients who are at the very beginning, but I find that you get a lot more bang for your buck by learning what you can. So reach out if you have questions. I do not mind if people reach out and email me or contact me on my contact form on my website. I really do believe in this work. I would want to encourage you, just kind of what I referred to earlier when someone asked, like, is it possible to hurt yourself with this work? No, in a sense, there's not. But what's really important is to be gentle with yourself, to be kind with yourself, to be compassionate with yourself. I will say, when I am a dive in the deep end kind of person, and when I learned about this work, my eyes were just like, what? Like, and it was resonating so much that I just went strong and hard, and I went fast. And I look back on that, and I know this is going to sound a strange thing to say, but I felt so emotionally raw. It felt like someone had ripped off the top layer of my skin. I just felt exposed. And I wasn't, I didn't have a nervous breakdown or anything, but like I was feeling like, wow, this is a lot. this is too much. And then I went and found a therapist to work with because I was like, I can't do all this on my own. So what's really important is to give yourself a lot of compassion, take it one step at a time. And then if you need more supports, access those, find what you need, be gracious with yourself, kind with yourself, and then consider just taking it step by step. For many of us in chronic symptoms, we're desperate to get out of those symptoms. And I get that because I was there. But pushing and forcing and strong arming your way through is gonna be drawbacks, and that's gonna actually work against you. So that's my encouragement. If you're feeling a hope, if you had tears during the film or it was resonating with you, you were like, wait a minute, this is resonating with me. Follow that. There's something there for you. I don't know what it is, but I really encourage you to just continue discovering more about this approach. And if more of what you watch, listen to, read, and learn about seems to mirror your own experience, you're on the right track. Keep going. That's where I leave you.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you, Michelle. Yes. So this
You're
is such an
welcome.
amazing night. Just, I know there were a lot of people here. I know some people had a little difficulty accessing the film, but know that everyone has a whole nother week. You have till midnight, February 16th to watch it on that portal that you got. I'm going to send by email, probably more emails than you want with that information. I'll send the resource list and all the other information that you might want. And I'm also going to send this recording so that if you want someone to watch it and they want to see the intro and the Q&A, they will be able to watch that as well. So I guess, Cheryl, do you have anything final to say?
Thank you so much, Michelle, for hosting the Q&A, and thank you, Abby, for inspiring this this movie this night. Yeah, very lovely.
Thank my mother. She's the one who started with Dr. Sarnow years ago and moved me to do this. So thanks, Mom, wherever you are.
Incredible. Thank you both for inviting me and for everyone who attended here, taking the step to introduce yourself to this. It's really powerful, and I just encourage you on your journey. And yeah, reach out if you have any questions.
Wonderful. I know people will. And yes, you can share this link with anybody. This is all free. We secured it for anyone that you know. So please share this link with anyone. They do not have to register at this point with us. But if anyone wants to connect with us, you can. You have all of our information. And I'll just say, have a wonderful night. Thank you all so much, and be well. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for listening in. To find out more about my work and Mindbody course, How We Heal Chronic Pain and Fatigue, please go to my website, michellewiegers.com. I'm also on YouTube, where you'll find my podcast, Creating Space, or follow me on Facebook and Instagram.